In the suburbs, working for a living means after work, you start living. It's family time. A time to savor the peace and quiet you've worked so hard for. But when morning comes and the workday's begun, that quiet can take on an eerie tone.
Dorothy!
In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Police respond to a 911 call in a Scarborough neighborhood. It appears Dorothy Ortez has died in her sleep. There's just one thing.
There was a small amount of blood, and no explanation for why there should be blood.
Following procedure, the officer calls in homicide. Detectives Jim Jones and Tony WARR arrive at the scene.
There's no sign of a struggle. There's no sign of any great injury, except under her left eye, just in the lower eyelid, there was a bruise.
There was some speculation that she may have stumbled and hit her head on the corner of a dresser. Again, why did she die from that?
The detectives order an immediate autopsy. The pathologist tells the detectives that his initial examination of Dorothy Ortez showed no signs of an aneurysm nor any signs of a heart attack. But he has discovered one thing.
The pathologist came to us and said, "What are we going to do about the bullet in her head?" And we were totally shocked. We had no idea that Dorothy had been shot.
There certainly wasn't enough trauma, or not the trauma you would expect from somebody getting shot in the head.
It would be most unusual for someone to be shot in the head and for there to be no exit wound.
And even stranger, an almost imperceptible entry wound.
It turned out that the bruise that we saw beneath the eye was where the bullet had entered.
Someone held a gun up to Dorothy Ortez's face and pulled the trigger. At the Ortez house, the detectives interview the woman who made the 911 call. Her name is Juanita. She's been boarding with the family for a couple of years.
She was a foreign student. She was studying hairdressing, and she was home every night. But once a week, she would stay overnight at her boyfriend's. And it was the night that this happened, that she happened to be at her boyfriend's.
The detectives asked Juanita to tell them about Dorothy and the rest of the Ortez family.
Dorothy did seem to be a saintly lady that was involved in helping all kinds of people.
She'd been involved with the Girl Guides organization for a long time. And her husband, Richard, he had been involved with the Boy Scouts organization all of his life.
But Juanita admits they weren't the perfect family. There were problems caused mainly by their son, Donnie.
She did also tell us the son had some problems with the police, and that at one time had taken a sledgehammer to the house and had damaged the garage door and the veranda.
But Juanita says that wasn't the worst thing Donnie did.
One time he called the police on his brother-in-law, who ended up getting arrested for drugs.
Because of this, Donnie's sister lost custody of her 4-year-old son.
Children's Aid had placed the child in the custody of Richard and Dorothy to look after him.
Juanita says Dorothy never forgave Donnie for what he did to his sister. And that led to more conflict between them.
The boarder told us that the son had assaulted his mother on occasion, had slapped her.
His father, Richard, banished Donnie from the house. The detectives get an update from the lab. Police have determined that Dorothy was killed with a .32 caliber bullet, but they can't understand why the bullet is in such pristine condition. Most bullets, when fired, lose their shape. Dorothy's husband, Richard, arrives home and is told his wife is dead. The detectives want to know his whereabouts since last night.
He told us that he had done as usual, that he left the house, I think, about maybe 6:30 or after 6, that he had touched her, shook her, and that she said she was awake, and that he then left and went downtown to work.
He owned a window washing business, and he had 3 men that worked for him, and they met every morning around 7 o'clock.
The detectives estimate there was a 2-hour gap between when Richard went to work and Juanita arrived home. Plenty of time for murder.
I remember asking him if he knew how his wife had died, and he said he hadn't. So I told him that she had been shot.
Richard is shocked. He tells police he is a gun collector. He keeps them in his study.
He had 2 .22 caliber revolvers and a .38 caliber revolver. Now we knew that the caliber we were looking for was a .32, and he didn't own a .32.
We asked Richard who would want to kill Dorothy, who would want to shoot her, and he said, maybe our son.
Police need to find Donnie Ortez. After a bullet is found lodged in Dorothy Ortez's brain, her husband Richard says their son Donnie might have done it. The detectives learn that, like his father, Donnie owns a window washing company. But Donnie isn't at the job site. The detectives question his employee.
We learned that he was supposedly telling some of his employees that his dad had shot his mother in the head, the back of the head, and that the bullet had come out through the eye.
While that's not exactly what happened, it's suspiciously close. Meanwhile, uniformed officers canvass the neighborhood to see if anybody heard anything unusual. They're surprised by what they learn.
Nobody of the neighbors had heard any gunshot going off.
Detectives finally catch up to Donnie and bring him in for questioning. He denies killing his mother. He says his father is saying these things about him because they are now rivals in the window washing business.
He was not that friendly with his father or the rest of his family. But he was not happy that his mother was dead.
Donnie claims his crack about a shot through the eye was a wild guess. Besides, he's not the marksman in the family. His dad is. Ask anyone at the local gun club. Donnie has agreed to a lie detector test.
He passed it with flying colors.
His alibi as to his whereabouts, etc., were checked out, and he was cleared as a suspect. He was a bad actor, you know, but he didn't kill his mum.
At the Ortez house, forensic investigators are methodically searching room by room for clues. In Richard's home office, they find a letter addressed to Richard that has nothing to do with business.
The letter was dated about 10 days before Dorothy died.
The wording on it was basically, you know, you don't have the key to my heart, but you have the key to my house. I need it back.
Detectives bring in Richard Ortez for questioning.
I asked him if he was having any extramarital affair.
Richard admits he had a girlfriend, but says he hasn't seen her in 2 months.
Why is this being kept from us? You know, it could be just a person feeling guilty about having an affair. I don't know.
Detectives release Richard, but put him under surveillance. They dispatch officers to interview members of Richard's gun club.
They all recalled different weapons that Richard Ortez had owned, and a couple members also recalled that Richard Ortez had had a .32 caliber, what was referred to as a British Bulldog.
That's the same caliber of gun that killed Dorothy Ortez. But no .32 caliber was found in Richard's collection. Acting on a hunch, Appleton asks for the address of the club's bullet maker.
Members of gun clubs, they always have somebody who makes reloads for them because buying shells or buying the bullets are just too expensive.
The detectives pay a visit to Richard's girlfriend.
The girlfriend was a single mother with 1 child. Decent, hard-working lady. She was involved in scouting, and that's where she had met Richard.
The girlfriend tells police that she and Richard were having an affair for the last 2 years, but she wanted things to change.
She had given him an ultimatum that he left Dorothy or they were finished.
We expressed our suspicions to her that he may be responsible for his wife's death.
She's shocked, but not surprised.
She knew he was a member of a gun club, and that he had told her sometime in the past that he had had 3 special bullets made.
One of the bullets, he said, was for Dorothy. 1 was for the son. 1 was for anyone who tried to stop him and got in his way.
And asked her when was the last time she'd seen Richard, and she told us it was 2 or 3 days previous to that night.
Not the 2 months Richard has claimed. The girlfriend agrees to let police put a listening device in her apartment. Constable Appleton visits the gun club bullet maker.
Half his apartment seemed as though it was part of the gun trade. To me, it was like, wow, this fellow is not just making 1 or 2, he's into this big time. During the conversation, he told me that he had made some bullets for Richard Ortez.
Ortez wanted the bullets for an old .32 caliber British Bulldog, but the gun was nearly falling apart.
He was very vocal on how bad shape this gun was in.
Fearing the gun would blow up if Richard tried to fire it, the bullet maker agreed to make special bullets, no more than a 1/4 load of gunpowder per round. The bullet maker insists he had no idea Richard was going to use the gun on anyone.
I think he was trying to distance himself. If he admits that he knows he's making bullets for a man who wants to kill his wife, then he's going to be in deep doo-doo.
He offers police a few bullets left over from the batch he made for Richard. They'll be sent to the lab for analysis. 72 hours into the investigation, police have a prime suspect, but they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him.
We didn't have a murder weapon, and there was no eyewitness.
And so far, the bug in the girlfriend's apartment has given police nothing.
The listening device in the girlfriend's apartment had been placed in a false fireplace, and it turned out that the false fireplace was also a stereo system. And of course, when Richard Ortiz was over there, he'd put on music, and all we could get was the music.
Does Richard suspect the place is bugged? Police need to fix the situation, but they don't want to alert the girlfriend. They're afraid she'll give away the game.
I believe that the girlfriend really had strong feelings for Richard. Hard to believe, perhaps, but I think she did. So, the day after we took her out to Swiss Chalet, while we were at Swiss Chalet, an officer went in, relocated the bug, and everything was just fine.
Or is it? The next night, Richard stops by. But things don't go according to plan. The girlfriend refuses to let him in.
And when she looked out and saw who it was, she got frightened, and she called the police.
In fact, she was very scared. She thought that something was going to happen to her.
Mounting evidence suggests former scout leader Richard Ortiz shot his wife Dorothy in an almost undetectable way. Police have bugged his girlfriend's apartment, but their investigation is jeopardized when she refuses to let Richard in. She wants to help police, but she's frightened.
The girlfriend, I'm certain, was scared because she knew, for Richard had told her, that he had 3 special bullets made.
And one of them might be for her. The detectives try to convince her that the only way she'll be safe is if she helps them put Richard behind bars. Finally, she agrees. She invites Richard over the next night. He arrives bearing gifts.
He did actually take a lot of clothes over to her, his wife's things. He even took a pair of used oven mitts over there for her to use.
This time he has brought something special. His wife's fur coat. He tells his girlfriend that if it doesn't fit her, she should give it to one of her fat friends. He also jokes about his wife's lack of interest in sex.
He didn't miss her, and now he was free to do whatever he wanted to do. All the circumstances have to indicate guilt. That's the test for a circumstantial case. And that was what was happening as we were going through this. Each piece would drop into place, and that wouldn't fit any other conclusion.
Then one last piece of the puzzle falls into place. The lab confirms the reloads given to police by the bullet maker in the first 72 hours match the bullet that killed Dorothy Ortiz. One month after Dorothy Ortiz was found dead, police finally have enough evidence to arrest her husband, Richard, and charge him with first-degree murder.
There was no denial. There was no screaming. There was no shouting that he was innocent. There was nothing of that. They just came along.
The detectives now believe they know the full story. Richard Ortiz fell in love with another woman and lost all interest in his wife of 28 years.
He wanted to walk away and have another life of his own. Didn't want Dorothy around.
So he devised what he thought was the perfect murder. As a gun lover, he was well aware that a bullet with a quarter charge doesn't make much noise. The neighbors would hear nothing. He also knew there'd be no exit wound. The bullet was too weak to penetrate the skull. When his girlfriend gave him an ultimatum, Richard decided it was time to act. All his careful planning would be worth it. he knew the boarder would be out all night. No one would ever suspect a thing. It would look like Dorothy died in her sleep.
So it was a very, a very cold-blooded, deliberate act where a man can shoot his wife in the head, get dressed, go to work, and carry on like nothing ever happened.
When the bullet was discovered, Richard even tried to pin the murder on his son.
Richard had planned this very carefully, but not too cleverly.
At his trial, Richard broke his silence to speak in his own defense. He told the jury, a man has certain needs.
You could tell by the looks on the jury's face. If it would have been the old Roman times, the thumbs would have been going down at that time.
Richard Ortez was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Dorothy.
If you see Girl Guide cookies for sale, you might think of Dorothy, because she was very much involved in Girl Guides. It often happens, something comes up and you talk about it, and I still think how shocking it all was.
The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case.